This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Midsel, recording on Rungy Land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. Let Me Sum Up's Global Vice President of Marketing and Extortion and incoming Executive Director Policy at the Investor Group on Climate Change, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie, and congratulations on the new role.
Thanks, guys. You know what? I've had so much fun marketing and extorting the benefits of climate-related podcasts. I thought maybe I need to go apply those skills a little bit more broadly across the economy and extort some more investment into the net zero transition. So that's what we're doing on mission here.
So all those investors out there, fair warning.
You're on notice.
Frankie's coming for your wallets.
Absolutely, and unashamedly so.
Don't fall asleep, investors.
God. That's just the message I want to be.
Anyone dozing off at the forthcoming IGCC conference?
All right. Al Gore is speaking at that, by the way. I'm already fangirling about that.
You should watch his wallet.
You certainly should. Good God, this is not how I planned for this conversation to go. But as we're speaking, and I'm cloistered here, my place on Gadigal country with a Boko lapdog in Chewy to snuggle. It's been a day. My news just went public today, so it's super exciting, and I'm really, excited to get stuck in with the good folks at IGCC. But it's also pretty emotional. I'd been at the Property Council for over 9 years. Lots of water under the bridge there, lots of friends and fellow travellers, and it's been a lovely day with lots of messages and calls, and it's a lot, but excited about the next chapter, hey?
Yeah, it's been a good innings at the Property Council. I know they'll be devastated to lose you, Frankie, and I know IGCC will be delighted to have you on the team. It'll be really great watching you kicking goals on a new field. We're really looking forward to it.
It's going to be spectacular.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. All right.
Moving on, we are also joined by a man who, at a recent role-playing game convention, submitted himself to the Arkham Sanatorium Sanity Assessment, thus receiving a battery of tests that determined both the depth and nature of his insanity. That man, of course, is Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
Yes, well, one may be forgiven a little suspicion of a psychometric test that did not find me to be suffering from CBAM mania. But we'll
test is wrong.
Providing definitive proof of that a little later on in this very episode.
We sure will. On this week's show, we look at whether the key to unlocking the clean trade opportunity in Asia is a superhero team-up, featuring our old mate carbon pricing and its new lovable sidekick, carbon border adjustment mechanisms. But first, a long-expected party was finally held in Victoria last week as the Allen government announced a very sexy package of regulations that together represent a big step forward in the phase-out of fossil gas in Victorian homes. We didn't get the phase-out of space heaters the government consulted on, but gas hot water heaters are on the way out. We have a raft of ambitious new minimum rental standards encompassing both electrification and thermal performance, and all new residential and virtually all new commercial buildings will soon be all electric. Frankie, somewhat confusingly, most mainstream media characterised this big package of reforms as a massive backflip. But what did you make of it, if you care enough about buildings policy anymore to comment?
Please. This, just for the avoidance of doubt, that's not a hobby horse I'll be vacating anytime soon.
All right, well, give us your take.
I mean, look, were we all surprised that the media jumped on the one or two condescending voices in a sea of hundreds that welcomed this package of measures? Probably not. I mean, I think it's kind of lazy reporting, if I'm honest. My take, the take of the vast, overwhelming majority of stakeholders who care about this stuff, would see it for what it is, which is, in my view, the strongest signal I think we've seen so far about the now structural and irreversible decline in fossil gas use in buildings in this country. we've acknowledged in the past, the ACT government has done some really great leading work. Being a smaller jurisdiction, I think the work that Victoria's been doing, which has been a few years in the making now, with their, really excellent work on a staged approach to the gas substitution roadmap and revising that and looking at a program of work over some time, sort of representing the state that's most heavily reliant on fossil gas for heating and cooking and hot water in our homes and buildings, means that this is the direction of travel into the future. And I'm really excited to see it. I think it's leadership, it's brave. And I know we all know that, it's not been easy for the government to do that. So I really do want to commend everyone involved with this work for getting it to this point. And the for or against, did the advocates get everything they wanted? No. As you pointed out, Luke, not every gas appliance is going to be phased out at end of life in homes. Space heating remains the challenge, but no doubt its time will come, and probably sooner again than some of us might think. This is a huge deal. There's a lot of advocates out there that can rightly be really proud of what they've done. I do want to also just remark on the significance of a couple of those reforms there. I think minimum rental standards focused on energy efficiency have been such a long time coming, not just in Victoria, but really across the country. And for those people who aren't buildings wonks, like at least one of us on this call, our minimum energy efficiency standards.
I feel seen, Frankie.
Yes, well...
I think you're an honorary buildings wonk at this point, Janet. You've heard us crap on about it for long enough.
That's right. Does that make us honorary CBAM wonks, Luke?
That is right. That's what I was angling for.
Well, we'll see.
We'll hand in our homework at the end of this episode.
See what you make of it.
Don't cash in your merit badge yet, Mansell.
But I do want to note that years ago now, in the trajectory for low energy buildings, it was originally published in 2019, and the addendum that followed focused on measures for existing buildings. There was a commitment from the Commonwealth and all states and territories are the ones that are relevant here to introduce such standards. And it's been really slow going across the country. So this move from Victoria, again, is massive and shows the way for other states and territories to follow. I also think, it's a big jurisdiction to also be, effectively mandating every new residential and commercial building to be built all electric moving forward. Now, there's some exemptions around industrial uses and things like that. But when you think of offices and shopping centres, apartment buildings and all of those, like in Victoria, new builds are now going to be all electric. That's a really, really big deal. And I think, the shift that will happen in the industries that support the design and engineering and construction of new buildings are all going to reorient around that inevitable future. And as I think all of us were in the media last week commenting on this. It was really nice to see LMSU strong and present in support of this, which was great. Every new building built with gas today is one that's going to be needed to retrofit down the track at a greater cost. So it's just, don't make the problem worse, guys. So this is really awesome. And the timing of it also coincided with another decision that the City of Sydney made as well. Should we touch on that briefly?
Yeah. What are the Johnny-come-latelys in New South Wales doing to follow in the slipstream of mighty Victoria?
Well, the Victorians on the call might well say that. But so City of Sydney, and I think a lot of people who are familiar with these issues would note that some of our big metropolitan councils have really showed a lot of leadership over many years when it comes to sustainability in the built environment. And so late last week, the City of Sydney Council voted that all new residential buildings from the end of December this year should also be all electric. And they've proposed some further consultation in the coming months for a similar outcome on commercial builds. You know, interestingly, there wasn't like a bunch of negative outrage in the media or sort of stakeholders in response to that. I think it was broadly accepted.
With one minor exception.
Oh, in the case of Sydney?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yes, you did.
Did I?
You definitely did.
Some guy called Chris.
Yeah.
Chris Minns.
Oh, of course. Well, yeah, of course. Sorry. The regrettable comments of the New South Wales Premier following that, where he called the move an overreach. Really regrettable, I think. And for those who don't pay as much attention to the New South Wales of it all in this space, he was asked his views on a statewide gas ban effectively for new home. I think it was in the context of new homes initially, shortly after he was elected Premier, and he sort of ruled it out. But it was within maybe a month of him becoming Premier, and, you know, kind of regrettable to be making such a broad-ranging commitment like that so early in the piece before you've had the benefit of briefings and all that sort of stuff. So unfortunately, I think for New South Wales, who are embarking on a big project of mapping out a 2035 strategy and how they're going to meet their rather ambitious 2035 target, it's sort of boxing in themselves a little bit on some of the things they might do, and it's putting the New South Wales Minister Penny Sharp in a bit of a tricky spot.
And as you say, it kind of reduces the manoeuvrability that the government has without giving sort of proper due consideration to the various options they have to drive the state's emissions profile down. Now, gas use in new homes in New South Wales, is it the biggest wedge going around when they're looking at those 2035 targets? Well, no, but it's not nothing. And as you say, Frankie, like, a good place to start is just not making the problem worse when you're trying to push the curve in the opposite direction. Yeah,
and just, politically, this last week would have been the time for friendly silence, or, as I think he suggested, Tennant, just going into the slipstream of Victoria and at least kind of thinking about, even for new builds, putting it on the table. The other thing that's a bit unfortunate about that is that the New South Wales Net Zero Commission's done some really good work. They did their inquiry on their first, sort of review into how New South Wales is going on its policies towards net zero, and they did a sector-by-sector breakdown, and wouldn't you know it, because of the way the emission scopes are broken down, all the opportunity in the built environment is getting rid of fossil gas. It's sort of very stark when you read the report, and a lot of the people who participated in that inquiry were fully supportive of more work happening in that space. So it's unfortunate, but of course it's not going to be the last time this comes up, and there'll be plenty more water under that particular bridge.
So I'll just add a couple of things about the Victorian piece of this, and it's an unusually difficult one to talk about on this pod because, in my day job, like you two, I was up to my elbows in this thing. It was a very busy time around the finalisation of this policy, and I can break the news on this podcast that a Dungeons and Dragons game I was running for Luke and Luke's son and my Pippin was interrupted multiple times by calls on a Sunday about this policy. And it's understandable that everybody was sweating it. The government, the state government, was sweating it right up until the last possible moment. Major planks were sort of in flux because policies like this have come a cropper in other jurisdictions around the world. Germany had an ambitious home electrification policy, and they had to row it back after a furious campaign against it. Britain has had, a debate going all over the place, but heat pumps have become a matter of like tabloid newspaper controversy somehow. And there were certainly people gunning for the electrification reforms here. What was notable, despite all that like personal excitement and tumult and offers and concessions and this and that, actually it just wasn't quite as big a deal as all that in the end. There was a lot of chat on ABC 774. There was a lot of interest, but a lot of organisations, including mine at the Australian Industry Group, wound up saying, oh yeah, that's all right. They made some changes. They said some things that addressed, for instance, the concerns that we've discussed on this podcast about how you handle loss of network value or the recovery of the value of the network as throughput of gas through it declines. And the government's not like they're not embracing the notorious RBD's solution or any other at this point, but they have said in like reasonably clear terms, we're aware of the issue, and as and when the economic regulation approach becomes not fit for purpose, we will work with stakeholders to fix it. So far, so okay, to better than okay. The question is, how bedded down and irrevocable is this by the time of the next state election? Which, who knows what's going to happen at that election? The polls have not been great for the Victorian government, but also the news has been full of bizarre internal mutual sabotage and hatred within the opposition. And, who knows what's going to happen there? But is this reform going to get unreformed depending on the outcome? Or is everybody, like the plumbers, the appliance suppliers, landlords and everybody else going to be so committed to just making stuff work that everybody will say, oh, can we please not throw this up in the air again, whatever the outcome of the election is? I don't know. I will be more than a little interested to find out.
I only have one other thing that I'm really keen to add, which is on the minimum rental standards, and something which we've talked about a lot recently, and including on that recent pod on Ron Ben David's paper about the regulated asset base on the gas network. These rental standards are a really important mechanism from an equity perspective, because many of the folk that everyone's worried about getting stranded on the gas network and sort of having those very significant impacts of rising gas prices, they will be picked up over time through these minimum rental standards. Because what do they do? When your gas hot water heater breaks down, get it replaced with an efficient electric heat pump. When your gas space heater, and this is the place where they did go through with the space heating regulations, when that breaks down, again, an efficient electric heat pump, reverse cycle air conditioner. In rental properties without any ceiling insulation will be installed. Draft proofing will be put in, and not an energy efficiency measure per se, but a really important resilience measure that they're putting in place is requiring that there is an air conditioner in a central living area so that you can actually keep yourself cool and not be overheating on those really hot days, which we're increasingly going to be faced with. So to the degree that one is concerned about equity, to the degree that one is concerned about supporting the most vulnerable in our community, it's not a perfect sort of crossover in terms of the Venn diagram, but there are an awful lot of Victorians aren't very well to do and do live in rental properties, and over time they'll be in a better and better position, both in terms of health and comfort and their cost of living because of these reforms. And that is a huge contribution to that part of the community, and a huge contribution to equity. We talk so much about equity, And so few of our policies are equal to the challenge. And I think Minister D'Ambrosio and the Victorian government deserve a huge amount of credit for actually bloody doing something about it. So good on them.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
In so many ways, I think this is one of the more significant bits of the package. And I think it's right to pull that out and celebrate it, because notionally we've had a commitment from every government around the country to implementing something like this. So now it's time for everyone else to get their skates on and start doing the same.
All right. Frankie and I only need to read 2 more CBAM papers to earn our CBAM merit badge. The next one is before us. Shall we chat about a report?
I'm not sure I ever agreed to that accreditation procedure, Luke.
A carbon border adjustment mechanism is a policy tool for equalising carbon prices across national borders and preventing carbon leakage. Indeed, we are thinking about following the EU's lead and getting ourselves one of these shiny new CBAMs here in Australia. Ooh. But what if we aren't thinking big enough? Could an Asian CBAM be the secret sauce we need to unlock the clean trade opportunity in our region? The answer is yes, at least according to a new paper from think tank Climate Energy Finance. In it, they argue that while carbon pricing is the critical driver for decarbonisation of industry, concerns over carbon leakage are reducing the stringency of carbon taxes and trading schemes in our region. Enter the Asian CBAM, which, starting with nations such as China, Japan, South Korea and Australia, would allow nations to strengthen their carbon pricing regimes by removing the fear of disadvantaging local industry. Not only that, but harmonised measurement reporting and verification regimes for carbon intensity would help rapidly build a new clean economy supply chain, a development which would benefit Australia's aspirations for clean energy superpowerdom. So, Tennant, my only question for you is this. Is there any malady or misfortune that a CBAM can't address?
I haven't found one yet. And on my patent medicine wagon traversing the Old West, I'll be donning my top hat, getting my hype man or woman, and selling CBAM for all possible ailments. But I think it's most relevant to the problems that you've outlined, Luke, and also, and this is where the logic of this paper is really good. We'll come to a couple of other issues with the paper in a minute, but the thing that investors in decarbonised industrial production really need is a market for those products that will pay for those products. And the observation that Matt Pollard and Tim Buckley, authors of this paper, make is that trade in cement and aluminium and steel in Asia is largely within that region. And so the more economies have both a domestic carbon price and a border adjustment that is embodying the carbon value in the selling prices for these products within those markets, the bigger the market, the cumulative total addressable market for clean steel, clean aluminium, cleaner cement is, and the more investable that production is throughout the whole region. And so that's a great idea. That really is a transformative win-win vision of why a bunch of countries in the region might consider adopting border adjustment, rather than the first thought many people would have, which is, oh, this is some kind of trade war, race to the bottom, everybody throwing up barriers to each other. That's not the intention of these authors at all. It's a mutual industrial policy to create a greater regional supply chain. And that's a great idea. There are some hairs on it, to say the least. In the detail, there are some problems that individual countries would face in participating in that. Probably Australia most of all, given the unique weirdness of our carbon pricing policy, the safeguard mechanism, which really needs to come out of the closet and acknowledge love is love and carbon pricing is carbon pricing.
Are you suggesting the 22-27 review is the carbon pricing is coming out party, Kenneth?
I would rather it was a Mardi Gras of riotous celebration of the reality and the potential future blossoming of carbon pricing. But it is not that helpful to have to beat around the bush and talk in circumlocutions, which is still how we've mostly been talking about carbon pricing in Australia. There are still some circumlocutions in this paper. It's not quite as straightforward on some points that they clearly do understand as I would like, but maybe that is politic. But I think that the soundness of the basic idea here is enough to cover for some sins, and there are some sins here of this is a very interesting idea stapled onto a somewhat basic baby's first big book of carbon prices. But I found it valuable even so. What did you guys think?
Well, just reacting to the baby's first book thing, I was surprised by how much of the paper, probably I want to say upwards of 70 to 80% was actually just like a characterisation of carbon pricing 101 and then a detailed articulation of the way that different carbon pricing regimes work in our region. That is not what I took from the title, which was very much focused on the Asian CBAM and how that would work. So I was left, given my expectations, I was left wanting a lot more in terms of how one would pursue that. Like, what would the diplomatic play be? Like, I was expecting more of a blow by blow of the steps one would go on to achieve a quote unquote Asian CBAM. And I still have aspirations to one day read that paper because I think that would be a really good paper. We'll add it to our list of papers, like fantasy papers, fan fiction papers that we wish someone would write so that we can cover them on the podcast.
We've got an okay developing record of manifesting papers.
Yeah, that's right.
There you
think
go. We'll just put it out into the universe.
You've just given the folks at Clean Energy Finance a request for a sequel.
Yeah. But I ultimately, sort of having gone through the whole thing and sort of processed the kind of discrepancy between my expectations and what I was actually being given, going, well, this is actually quite useful. And I thought it was useful, particularly in the context of having read a couple of episodes ago, the New Energy Trade paper from the Superpower Institute, which was kind of almost looking at a scenario in the far future where there was a carbon constraint. That you just took that as read and you sort of tried to imagine what the trade flows would look like if there was that strong commitment to a carbon constraint. And this is almost sort of grappling with some of the same issues, but instead of just imagining that exists in the far future, they're saying, well, we have an aspiration for that to exist. We need mechanisms to be put in place so that it does exist. What is the baseline that we're starting from? And the unfortunate news is, as chipper as this paper is, we're starting from a ragtag bunch of piecemeal, moderately effective policies at best in a few nations in our region. And they've kind of all got hairs on them in one way or another and would need to evolve significantly. And the core point from this paper, for anyone that is playing along at home and has been on the whole CBAM journey over the last 3 years, you probably know this, like a carbon border adjustment mechanism is, at least in theory, a pretty good way of reducing concern about carbon leakage and therefore increasing confidence that one can increase the stringency of carbon pricing. And that's, in a way, the whole point of the paper.
Yeah.
Is to reinforce that point, but sort of take it up a level from the national context to the regional context, and then bring in that kind of secret sauce of, you know, how a regional approach could supercharge the momentum towards a sophisticated global trading market in these clean commodities.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I had maybe similar expectations of reading this paper in terms of the the detailed how-to about how to go about implementing tenants' like fantasy of not even just an Australian CBAM or BOCA, but like world domination. Let's go.
CBAM's for everyone.
Let's go regional. Everyone gets a CBAM.
You do. You do. Okay.
But
there's a CBAM under your seat right now.
Oh my God, it's been here the whole time. I didn't know. Just in sort of thinking about what they intend this paper to do, I think sometimes the three of us are in a bit of danger about assuming that what we want to read or is going to be of use to us is of use to all people who care about climate and energy policy in this country.
I want you to make this point because I had the same thought.
Because whilst, you know, CBAM sicko T. Reid and aspiring CBAM acolytes Menzel and Miskovich might be ready for like the detailed plan on how to implement and train a regional CBAM.
Yes.
Clearly.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're actually quite there yet. So I do think that this paper is playing an important role for Australian policymakers because of the very reasons I think you both outlined at the start. We've actually been very good about really the last few years concealing the fact that we actually have a domestic carbon price and the safeguard mechanism and have in many cases deliberately sought to downplay that for political reason. And I think the consequence of that has been, to a certain extent, we're far less interested and across carbon pricing mechanisms in our region. So whilst, you know, it was probably not what I came for to read the detailed kind of breakdown of you know, China having the world's largest, you know, ETS down to, you know, the various mechanisms that South Korea and Japan and Singapore have implemented. I kind of think it's like it's necessary prior art that, you know, everyone in this country, if we were to do as the paper's authors would like and use the opportunity of Australia hosting COP31 in 2026, I think we kind of need to know what we're getting ourselves into and have that kind of broader picture more clearly articulated. So in that sense, I think it's a good, I'd almost even view it as a bit of a primer, and it really does.
Yep.
One of the, you know, many questions I was left wanting to know, and I think, of course, papers like this should shoot for ambition because, you know, we don't have a lot of time, and if you know, mechanisms like this are going to be an important part of the policy architecture moving forward. Like, we actually just do need to crack on with it and be ambitious about the kind of timeframes that we're talking about here. Like, how do people think about something like that being on the agenda in any kind of meaningful way by the end of next year?
Well, it would be rapid delivery diplomacy to get there.
Yep.
But something that I liked about this paper's carbon pricing primer aspect is that it situates border adjustment not as some weird new idea with shades of protectionism to it, but really just the continuation and completion of the core logic of carbon pricing. That it's closing a loophole in the internalisation of the externality. And as all our major regional partners do their own versions of carbon pricing, baseline and credit schemes, emissions trading schemes, carbon taxes, as part of, and maybe increasingly important parts of, their armoury of climate policies, they are going to all confront similar sorts of problems to those that we have dealt with in our own ways. and other economies around the world, Europe, not least among them, that have pursued carbon pricing, they're going to find similar problems. And it isn't crazy to be putting forward the idea of skipping lightly through the 20 years of policy development and various mistakes that Europe made and converging a bit more rapidly on a solution that is more functional, but also very doable in this messy, multi-speed, fragmented world that we are in versus the very standard pious and always seen to be unachievable ambition of a single global carbon price. This idea wouldn't even be a single regional carbon price. As I read their proposal, you would still have different carbon price levels in each of those regional economies. And I think that's really important to this being a feasible thing to negotiate towards. I don't know that we'll get that far by November 2026. To have a standard set of methodologies for mediating trade into economies, between economies with different approaches to different but translatable approaches to climate policy is doable in a low transaction cost way. I think at least starting the conversation is a realistic aspiration over that time. And my final thought at this moment is just that as of now, Australia is considering a border adjustment of our own by Virginia Woolf. If that remains on the table but not necessarily finalised by November 2026, that's actually a potential big sore spot for Australia as host of COP, because currently the discourse around border adjustment that nations in our region, China, India, that they most speak to is, yikes, this is a terrible unilateral trade measure that Europe is whacking us with, and it's unjust and damaging, and something should be done to stop it. And if Australia, as putative co-president of the COP, is also doing a thing that is widely seen as damaging to, inaccurately, but seen as damaging to developing countries, then that could be very awkward. Whereas this kind of regional collaborative pro-transition but also pro-equity logic for border adjustment would be a much better way, even if the negotiations have barely begun, let alone concluded, to handle that potential vulnerability.
There is a significant opportunity, I think, to build momentum for the conversation, but I don't necessarily think how you get this done is to spend the next 5 years negotiating a quote-unquote Asian CBAM. It's more about the way that you approach the creation of national CBAMs. Yep. And how does an Asian CBAM most realistically start? It's like two nation states interlocking their carbon border adjustment systems. Perhaps even prior to that, they're harmonising the way that they measure and verify carbon intensity. It's kind of like little bits of connective tissue between what are necessarily regimes that are being put in place in different nation states. But if you start with the goal in mind of saying, ideally, this would be something that is working in harmony in our region and is, as far as possible, streamlining trade flows rather than, one calculation having to be used here and another over there. That actually gives you the opportunity to click those Lego bricks together when you get to that moment, rather than kind of everybody doing something in their silo. And one of the encouraging things from this paper is there is actually quite a lot of effort in various fora to kind of do that sort of work. I think the significant contribution that this paper makes is actually just changing the frame for where we should be kind of thinking about our key partners in the creation of a carbon border adjustment, because we just talk endlessly about EU. Understandably, they're the first ones that have kind of gone down this pathway. And while there's no doubt, as you say, Tennant, lessons to be learnt, actually thinking much more deeply about the role of border adjustments in our region and linking it back into this superpower trade opportunity that we're also interested in, and kind of the role that this can play, not CBAMs for the sake of CBAMs, but CBAMs as part of, increased ambition and stringency in carbon taxes and trading schemes that will actually start to support the development of markets for the goods that we want to trade. That's an interesting frame. And I think that, as commentators, as policymakers, we just do get drawn inexorably back to Europe and the Anglosphere. I think on our 50th episode, Barry Sterland said, "Love the pod, guys. It'd be good for you to talk more about stuff that's happening in places that aren't Europe and the US and the UK."
Totally.
And this is an example of that, right? Like, there is stuff happening. And the other thing I'll say about the paper is it's not just characterising what's going on with different trading regimes in Korea or in China. It is giving up-to-the-minute information about latest developments like in the last couple of months, and what's prospective in each of those places, to the degree that I was like, well, this is going to be out of date in 6 months.
Yeah, there is.
But reading it right now is incredibly helpful for orienting oneself. And if you were hypothetically, I was trying to think, who is this actually for? It's probably not for us. You know who it would be really useful for? A diplomat without a background in this space who is being charged with the task of actually going and having a conversation with a partner in Asia around, how we can collaborate more closely on climate policy. It would be incredibly helpful for that person.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the really powerful things in the paper that actually comes through the bits that maybe the three of us weren't so hot on, which is the summary of like all the carbon pricing mechanisms that exist across, these countries where the proposal is to look at partnering, is it makes the point that many of those different mechanisms, emissions trading schemes, and the like, cover, the big ticket items, steel, cement, aluminium, and that those trade flows are actually by and large intra-regional. So you're kind of wrapping up these Southeast Asian countries in a friendly blanket. Saying actually, I think the narrative is it actually makes a lot of sense if you are going to think about applying a mechanism like this with a regional focus, that it actually makes a lot of sense when you see laid out that, in these countries, carbon pricing mechanisms cover all these commodities. And so it makes a lot of sense that you would then seek to equalise the pricing of that through a border adjustment from a regional basis, not just a national basis. So I think this paper makes that, that argument and puts that narrative out there very effectively, actually.
So here's a question. Of the carbon prices that are explored in the region that are taking shape, is Australia's actually, in its current form, maybe the hardest, requires the most transformation to fit into this kind of framework and approach that they're talking about? Because
of electricity?
For at least two reasons. Yes, one, we don't price carbon in electricity in Australia in a direct way anymore. And in fact, the RET is going to evaporate in 5 years' time. And we won't even be pseudo-pricing carbon in electricity. Australia couldn't do a border adjustment for Scope 2 emissions, electricity-related embodied emissions in products, without actually pricing it domestically. That would be discriminatory. And therefore, an Australian border adjustment couldn't make its full impact on highly electricity-intensive products like recycled steel or like aluminium. But then secondly, there's a lot of stuff in this paper about the things that governments can do with the revenue from carbon pricing to either address social equity issues or to accelerate industrial transition by offsetting the cost of the early phase of industrial innovation subsidies that they think are needed, because you're not going to jump straight to a carbon price sufficient to drive green steel on its own. Australia has, as part of our general PTSD fetal position on carbon pricing, a taboo against government making so much as a cent of revenue out of carbon price. And our status quo is we give away the right to emit for free through the baselines, and any flexibility beyond that comes through payments to private parties for Australian carbon credit units or safeguard mechanism credits. So there's no, and like you could imagine that continuing with a border adjustment and Australia saying, importers, you need to buy some ACCUs rather than you need to EU style pay for an equivalent cost unit to the Australian government. So there's no revenue to allocate. There's no fiscal direct benefit. Although, I guess the point that they make about how, which is an excellent one, about how internalising the carbon value in product markets, in the prices that steel and cement and so on are sold for, reduces over time the need for and the level of these early money-vomiting subsidy programs, tax credits, contracts for difference, grants, whatever else, that governments, including the Australian government, are using to try to jumpstart clean industry. They can have an exit strategy from that to the extent that border adjustment and carbon pricing combine. But still, Australia's government wouldn't be making any money unless it, I don't know, had a change of heart on the unique evil of carbon price revenue as opposed to, I don't know, income taxes, goods and services taxes, company taxes. They seem to be fine, but for some reason carbon is a hot stove.
I mean, I actually think that issue that you've just raised is very timely to be bringing into the discourse now when it's all about productivity, actually.
Productivity.
Yeah. Productivity,
Love it.
jazz hands. I just think, so much of policy reform over the next couple of years is going to be viewed with that lens. And I really liked, and, we've complained previously on this pod about talking about carbon pricing in isolation from other policies you need, to bring on and help deployment, particularly in those early stages of new technology, getting to scale where the learning rates come into effect and away you go. So I actually think it's really great that the paper steps out, not just conversation that you're highlighting there around whether and how you set pricing around CBAMs and how you then spend the money and, hopefully want to invest that back into decarbonising the various industries that are involved here, but also has some good ideas for the kinds of policies that are going to be necessary. Like, it makes a really strong case that you do need supply side incentives to spur on production, that you do need demand side incentives, to spur on consumer and business demand for these products, that those things aren't going to happen on their own just with the imposition of a CBAM. So I feel like in the context that we find ourselves in, which competitiveness of Australian business and tax settings and the like, I actually think there's probably not a better time to be revisiting things that have maybe seemed a little off the table for a while, because if we can seemingly approach a conversation about broader tax reform, like this should be in the mix, shouldn't it?
Yes.
Am I wildly? Maybe I'm just way too optimistic on that front. I don't know. I mean, I do wonder who are the surrogates for that argument in the room of 25 people going along to the cabinet room love-in with Treasurer Chalmers. But this is a conversation we should have. Come on, Productivity Commission.
The people in that room, they should all be asked to nominate a reform that they think somebody else in that room would love and that they themselves would hate. And then,
that's a great icebreaker.
Then the room should agree to do all of them.
And then they put it on a card on their head and they have to guess what reform they are.
Celebrity reform.
Oh, my God.
They've got like 3 days. They've got time for celebrity reform.
Break the ice.
That's a great icebreaker.
You're welcome, Treasurer. Look, yes, totally. Like there are challenges for Australia, but there's kind of challenges for all of the countries and their various ETSs that are sort of characterised. Japan's efforts on emissions trading, you've got to say, are pretty embryonic. They note that the Korean allowance units, their carbon trading unit, are trading at record low prices in 2024. Like, you could go through them blow by blow. There's obviously more momentum in some places than others. They spend a lot of time on kind of the work that's being done to kind of build some of that momentum in various places in Asia. But the challenges abound. And that's kind of the big point that I took away from it, is that a CBAM could play a role in stiffening the spine of some of these governments and kind of building some confidence within industry. And I think that's the key point, right? Like, there's always and this has been true ever since we started trying to implement carbon pricing those many years ago. Like, there's always been this challenge for governments in terms of industry policy of concern around carbon leakage. And so you have this free allocation of permits. And as a result, it is not having the impact that one would hope it would have. And the CBAM is the here to the rescue to kind of try and resolve that question. And I like the way that you framed it, and I guess comes through in this paper tenet of this kind of being like completing the architecture, and is the natural sort of result of the thought process one would go through about how you would implement carbon pricing in a world where there isn't a global carbon price, where there is different countries going sort of travelling at different rates, and there's needing to be some way of equalising this without disadvantaging those early movers, right?
Yeah, for sure. We are going to still be in a messy world for quite some time to come. And so the thing that is really useful about border adjustment is that it's a policy for a messy world, but it doesn't need to make that world any messier. It's something that, with a bit of forethought, you can do in a considerate way that is workable for your trade partners to navigate, and that as more countries do it, like, more is more. And the addressable market for clean industrial products keeps growing. It's not going to be something that means you can do without, like, a green iron tax credit or whatever your favourite instrument is overnight, or even within the first 10 years. But it is an exit strategy from those subsidies, which, as the authors make the point, that many Asian economies, especially like developing Asia, can't afford the kind of open-ended subsidies that until recently the United States thought it could afford. But maybe that last reference is a topic I'll return to a little later on.
I also wonder about some of the pushback that we sometimes hear at UNFCCC conferences of parties around, as you were saying, like, the developing world pointing to these sorts of things as discriminatory tariffs. I'm not sure how much that conversation has kind of really coalesced in an Asian context. And I wonder if there's an opportunity through this kind of multilateral process that is being proposed through this paper to kind of head it off at the pass and to work collaboratively, not just with the advanced economies in our region, but also with some of the developing economies. As the paper points out, India and Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia, and beyond are at various points of kind of working out their own pricing regimes, and the opportunity to kind of reach out to them and work with them saying, look, you might not be at a point where you want to put this in place now, but we want to work with you to make sure that the measurement and verification regimes, sort of some of the interlocking elements in terms of the trade regime would work for you if and when you wanted to, because we want to do that in an inclusive way. And ultimately we want you to develop clean industries that make sense in your particular context, that are going to take advantage of your competitive advantages. Like, we're interested in trade. We're not interested in kind of owning the whole thing. It's obviously a collaborative effort, but that could be really helpful in terms of making sure that the debate doesn't kind of sort of skid into a ditch that perhaps it has in other parts of the world.
What did you both make on, because I guess they name check a few of the multilateral platforms that are already out there that might be leveraged, as the town hall for some of this. They call it, there's obviously the Paris Agreement, which has, some just under 200 parties or whatever to that agreement. But then there's the Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches. I don't know, do people actually say that acronym a particular way? IFCMA. It doesn't roll off the tongue.
I think they try and avoid saying that at any cost.
Yeah. Which I think many of the countries, that the authors propose should be part of an Asian CBAM participate in.
Yes.
I think with the exception of China. Is that right?
I think China's in IFCMA. Oh, no.
Because they won't
China's
be in.
not in IFCMA.
Yeah.
Geez, that's one of the worst acronyms we've ever come across.
It's a big statement.
And they're not in the Climate Club.
No. So I kind of wondered if any of those are actually fit for purpose, or this would be something you would want to see us, leveraging, like the agenda of an Australia with the Pacific hosted COP, as a thing that you might form some more tailor-made platform of engagement for.
I'm interested in your thoughts in that context, because I think about climate clubs, and obviously US was kind of had joined everything, and I guess now they've lost their membership cards for everything or something.
They don't want to join any club that would have someone like them for a member.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Their absence is really kind of very prominent in this paper, and this is a paper which is trying to give a strong sense that there's an opportunity for positive momentum. It isn't dwelling on the absence of the US to the degree it's mentioned. It's largely in the context of that opening up an opportunity for China,
yes,
to take a global leadership position. And obviously, whether US is in or not, its behaviour is kind of roiling the global trade regime. It is creating a lot of flux. That takes up a lot of bandwidth of people just navigating those choppy waters. But this paper would posit that also opens up opportunities for new relationships to emerge, new approaches to emerge, and that could be actually helpful as trade flows are disrupted and countries are looking for new partnerships and new alliances, and maybe a Asian CBAM could be a part of that. Is that an argument that either of you found convincing?
So I think that is a good argument, and there is a little bit of text here really right at the end, and it's just 2 paragraphs saying this could be a way of not blocking trade but facilitating trade, and if you step carefully and respectfully, you can fulfill the non-discrimination obligations of the WTO. And that's good. I fear that if people were worried about CBAM as an anti-trade protectionist measure, you might want more than 2 paragraphs at the very end of this lengthy report to cover that off. But I want to posit in turn a question about how well we think it's going to go, given that border adjustment on its own, but even more so with the logic of the new energy trade paper that we covered recently, is about deeper international economic integration and the move of industrial activity to those places where the greatest underlying advantage in clean energy production is to be found. That's not at all what some people think they're supporting when they support a border adjustment. Some people think they're just supporting industry staying where it's put, goddammit, and here and not being run out of town by ruddy foreigners. And it's not actually that at all. Is there going to be buyer's remorse? Is there going to be we're not in this business view from those countries that currently have the energy intensive piece of the value adding stage for some of these products, and then come to discover the sinister, secret, fully published on the internet plan of the Superpower Institute that like 15 to 40% of that stuff moves to little old Australia. And the same deal in other regions. Europe could relocate a lot of its energy intensive activity to North Africa. That's not what Germany has in mind, maybe, but like what's going to happen there? Because it makes perfect economic sense. It's very neoliberal or neoliberal globalization. And like, hey, I've got the unpopular view that neoliberal globalization was largely great, but that is a less popular view than it has ever been.
Well, this is why I always come back to what is the strength of the carbon constraint one is dealing with. So you have to be really serious about it to navigate those choppy waters of economic transformation that would take place within those regions. If you're not serious about it, there's plenty of ways to wobble through and kind of fall off the path, right?
I mean, that's a necessary precondition for much of this happening, as we reflected on when we discussed the Superpower Institute's paper on the new energy trade, because like the fact is if that carbon constraint was recognised to be very real and very strong, it's not like there's going to be sufficient alternative, clean energy supply within China to deliver on much of that promise. So then it starts to become actually a question of necessity. So rather than having any, particular answers or solutions, I guess the question I would find myself asking here is, given, I think they're right to point out China's outsized role in this conversation, how it would be viewed within, what would China have to say about it taking, a leadership role on, because they would need to, right? Like if an Asian CBAM would be a thing, presumably it does need, a couple of those countries, and you would have to think like China's an early in or out. Like what's in it in the short term or whatever? What do we think is in it for them to want to lean in? Like I haven't done that thought experiment, and the longer term benefits I think we've all kind of talked about, but is there a shorter term diplomatic or political advantage in them leaning in to the void in some respects that the US has left by vacating the field on questions of leadership?
Well, so one thing that could encourage China to do that here is the same logic, actually, that the United States followed during the apogee of its influence in the global economic stakes in the 20th century. Wow, this is sounding very retrospective and funereal.
Before the fall.
In the before times.
Of empire.
Which was to leverage the size of its market and access to its market as a thing not just to extract concessions from others, but to attract friendship and engagement with it. China is by far the biggest market for steel and for cement and for aluminium. And to the extent that they do both price carbon domestically through their emerging national ETS, which hasn't been a big deal so far, but, you know, safeguard mechanism circa 2020 shows signs of one day becoming a big deal. Then they add a border adjustment to that. China becomes the market that would be clean energy and clean industry investors throughout the region are aiming for. And China will need those. Even as it wants to advance its own transition, it will need the additional supply from the region. So, if these thinking in centuries cliches about Chinese policymakers are even vaguely true, and I'm not sure they're much more than vaguely true, then that's a very convincing logic, says me.
Well, so just to that point, because one of the things that I was thinking about when I was framing up that question to you is, China's Belt and Road Initiative, they've used investment in infrastructure, in countries, particularly in our region, very much to kind of curry favour. Certain countries, for a range of reasons. So I wonder, that an Asian CBAM is one thing in that potential mix. And I think, it starts to get complex pretty quickly when you could look at not just the involvement in something like that, but a lot of the other things that this paper calls for, in terms of those other supports, right, is also about shoring up of the energy infrastructure to support all this fabulous green industry. And you could imagine a country like China, who, as you say, has taken a very long-term view about its engagement in the very deliberate way it's done some of this kind of stuff in the past, might look at this sort of opportunity.
All right, two final thoughts. Number one, how do we feel about sort of deeper economic integration with China? That is a big question and brings into a whole.
Let's resolve it now.
Yeah, just in the last 30 seconds of this pod, let's just fix that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of additional sort of geopolitical considerations that Australian policy makers need to bring to that sort of conversation, because as you have both said, China would be easily the most significant player in any sort of Asian CBAM, with a lot of influence in how that played out. So that's something we would need to think about. The other one is that you have made, I believe, Tennant, the argument on this podcast that we shouldn't worry about drawing the ire of President Donald J. Trump through a carbon border adjustment mechanism in Australia, because it would be a rounding error. It would not even, merit, a tweet or a truth or whatever he calls them at 3 a.m. in the morning, because he wouldn't even know there's so much going on in the world. You start to Lego together an Asian tariff regime, and maybe he starts to get quite interested in that, right?
Maybe, but the US just doesn't export that much steel or cement, or aluminium. They consume what they make locally.
Oh, you're making a fact-based argument as to why he wouldn't care about this. He'd look at the evidence. He'd look at the trade flows, the briefing on his desk.
I don't need to money talks and bullshit walks, and there's not that much export bucks on the table for the US in those industries. They are about financial services, Hollywood, bioceuticals, and Facebook, and like that's it.
All right, as you were. It's all fine. As always, we close out the show with one more thing, in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. But before I get to each of our individual one more things, our listeners have submitted one more thing. One specific listener, Rob Law, visited our shiny new website, clicked on the button, recorded a voice note, and asked us a question. And this is what he said.
In the EU, the concept of energy sufficiency is prominent. But in Australia, we only talk about energy efficiency. Why do you think energy sufficiency isn't a concept that's taken off in Australia?
I feel, Frankie, that you are the local sufficiency maven. Yeah, you bring it regularly. You say, you drop these comments in the conversation, say, well, we could look at this from a sufficiency perspective. I could get Mark to do a supercut of you mentioning sufficiency.
Oh, God.
Over the course of the podcast.
Could help us all.
That would be, to be clear, a poor use of his time.
It would. I'm going to say the obvious thing, and I think it's got a branding problem in Australia, and I feel like especially in this moment when, the zeitgeist of things is all about abundance, I think people are probably predisposed to not receive a lot of the actual substance of sufficiency in a manner in which it's intended. And that, in making an argument for sufficiency, you're arguing that people should have less in their life, that they should somehow be not having their needs met, that they I don't know. I feel like the common kind of trope about someone who's like an anti-sufficiency keyboard warrior or something is like, we don't want you to be running your heater when it's like super cold in winter. You can just throw on some Ugg boots and sit there shivering in a corner or something like that. That's the kind of picture that the sufficiency movement would have you embrace. And I where I come back to is I think it's weirdly a bit of a cultural thing in this country. And I think at some point, I don't think it'll ever be branded sufficiency. But I do think we're going to start engaging with some of the concepts that sufficiency kind of wants to push. And I've been really interested in this from a built environment perspective for a long time. Like, just to give you, one example, when we find ourselves in conversations about electrification, for example, right? High-rise commercial buildings. Let's electrify them. Okay, that's hard. Well, have we ever stopped to think about, do I have to swap out the big-ass gas boiler in the basement with an equally large big-ass heat pump in the basement to deliver exactly the same things? Or could you take the opportunity to ask the question, the design question, like, well, do we have to be solving for exactly the same design problem this time round in 2025 versus whenever this building was built? And you could ask, do people need to be washing their hands with hot water on the 70th floor of an office high-rise, or is just normal temperature tap water actually just fine in that instance? No one's going to be worse off. So I just think there are some very practical things when it comes to materials that go into buildings. Like, I've got a buildings lens over it. I'm rambling too long. I think it's a cultural issue in this country. It hasn't, I think because it just hasn't been in the policy zeitgeist here for a long time, it makes it all the harder to introduce it into the landscape. But I think it should be. I'm a sufficiency wonk.
Tennant, you're a noted hater of sufficiency. Can you explain to Frankie why you need your hot water on the 37th floor?
Oh, look, earlier in this podcast, I think I said that I've had enough of sufficiency, but Frankie, you've turned me around. Too much sufficiency is never enough.
So we have gone long and we have other things to get to. And I think it's a very interesting question. I'm sure there's potentially a thesis in it. I would just contest the premise that we talk a lot about efficiency in Australia.
Yeah, there is that too. Maybe the three of us talk a lot about efficiency in this country.
Well,
efficiency sickos.
Loud and proud.
If you're saying, why doesn't the Let Me Sum Up podcast shut up out about efficiency and talk about sufficiency, that would be a fair question. But that is not the question that you were asked. So thanks, Rob. And I guess it's a reminder to all our listeners, if you want to pose a deep philosophical question like Rob's or something more topical that's in the news and you'd be keen to hear our take on, letmesumup.net. Click on the voice memos tab at the top of the page and send us your voice note. All right, back to regularly scheduled programming. It's One More Things. Tennant, what have you got?
Well, I would like to combine two flavours, one wonderful, one terrible, that maybe taste great together. At the start of this episode, you noted, Luke, that I had, for funsies, recently undergone the Arkham Sanitarium Sanity Assessment, a wildly overcomplicated party game / board game from the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society that might one day be released if it is ever translated to a form anybody could play in less than 3 hours. One of the activities in the course of that game is for the players to administer therapy to each other, and the therapy that I and the other players administered to one of the others was to shout at them to stop being crazy for 30 seconds as loudly as we could. And the reason I bring this up is to say that everybody, if it's not too late by the time you hear this, should try this with the United States Senate, which is in the process of deeply psychotic behaviour to cripple the United States energy transition, raise energy bills, institute a bonkers new tax on wind and solar plants built after 2028, I believe it is, if they cannot prove in a truly Kafkaesque legal process that they contain not a single bolt or nail of Chinese content in them, and do all sorts of other terrible things besides. It may have already passed by the time you hear this. It may have all fallen over in a terrible heap, and let's hope so, along with many other terrible things in that one big beautiful bill. But it is bonkers, and if everybody behind it could be sent to the Arkham Sanitarium for a good, long, restful set of treatments, that would be great.
Fingers crossed. All right. Frankie, what have you got?
I want to come back on that voice note for 1 second, only because... No.
How much sufficiency is enough?
Never enough. It's never enough. So I need to preface this with, I hadn't listened to it until you sprung it on us in the pod just then. And so having mulled on it for an extra 20 seconds, I think the thing that's culturally different about Australia compared to places like Europe, for example, where sufficiency has been a thing for longer, I think it actually goes to the nature of Australia in more recent times being an immigrant country, and actually that so much of this country, our narrative as an Australia is, a place of endless opportunity where people come from all over the world to live, bigger and better lives, that we've actually relied on more people coming here, population growth, etc., to fuel our economic growth for such a long time. I think that's kind of baked into the psyche of this country in the same way that it is in countries like the US as well, where I'm pretty sure sufficiency doesn't get too much of a look in their domestic discussion, except maybe when it comes to renewable energy right now. So anyway, just an extra thought because I felt like that was worth it.
You've left me wanting more, Frankie.
Come on, people, send us a sufficiency paper. I'm hanging out for it. I do want to use my actual...
As part of your sufficiency agenda, you're having two
Yes,
more things.
that's right. That's right, Randall.
Land of opportunity.
You can just pipe down over there. I'm going to use my actual one more thing to give a shout out to a lovely peer and friend of the pod, Kristin Tilley, who is currently Australia's ambassador for climate change, but for no longer. She's hanging up the boots after about 3 years in the role, and I just want to give a massive shout out to her. I've sort of admired her work at a little bit of a distance, and even had the chance to chat a bit with Kristin around the last few COPs, as many of us have had the chance to. And I really just think her in that role, I think, has played a really crucial function in, I think, really re-establishing Australia's credibility in the climate space, particularly when it comes to that engagement with our Pacific neighbours. Certainly one of the things I took from conversations we had with her, that she was working very tirelessly, across really building up and strengthening those relationships, particularly at a regional scale. And it's kind of awesome when you find yourself at a COP and you see someone, as talented and, committed as Kristin, knowing that she's on a case and representing us in those forums has been pretty amazing. So I think she's heading off to Geneva with her family. She's going to go, I think, sort out Australia's WTO mission while she's at it. So best of luck to you, Kristin. You go with lots of friendship and encouragement from us here at LMSU. Thanks so much for your work.
Yeah.
Indeed. The only thing I'll add, and I second everything that you said, was that just the light touch she brought to all her conversations and her ability to range across just vast differences in terms of stakeholders and perspectives. And I think in those early days, early in the first term of the Albanese government, being able to talk to the industry people and the environment people and the people within government and the people in the broader diplomatic milieu, and just move effortlessly between those conversations. It was very noticeable how deftly she handled all of that, and at a time when I think there was a lot of enthusiasm and interest in what the government would do, but we were still waiting and seeing and how this new phase of government would play out. And I think she played a really important role in working with Minister Bowen to re-establish Australia's role internationally. And, it will be a big shoes to fill for whoever takes up that role as we head towards COP31.
And if Australia is indeed going to explore and implement, design a carbon border adjustment mechanism, there's nobody I'd rather have in any of the chairs at Geneva than Kristin Tilley, who's learned a thing or two about the topic while being harangued by people like me over the years, and through her own independent research and evaluation and judgment as well.
I guarantee that if you keep listening to this podcast, Ambassador, you'll continue to be harangued, albeit at a distance.
Almost certainly.
The good thing about a podcast is you could turn it off.
So, speaking of podcasts, for my one more thing, as many of you know, I participate in two podcasts. This fun fortnightly foray into climate and energy policy with Frankie and Tennant. We also have the First Fuel podcast over at the Energy Efficiency Council, which is our occasional interview show, diving into all manners of topics: efficiency, electrification, energy markets, flex, decarbonisation, lots of fun stuff. By the time this episode of Let Me Sum Up is up, there will be a new episode in the first fuel feed as well, which is a chat with my friend and former colleague, Rob Murray-Leach, who has been doing a bit of work for the Energy Efficiency Council on the topic of energy market governance reform, which has been a subject of interest to all three of us here on this podcast and many beyond it. There's a bit of a view amongst the stakeholders that we run with that, while there's a lot of sweat and exertion from many good people across the energy market ecosystem, the basic governance is designed for a fundamentally different system to the one that we have now in the 2020s. And it could do with a bit of work to make sure that it is fit for purpose moving forward. Much of the work that we've done in this space has been, I guess, problem definition and broad directions. And the work that Rob's done with a green paper that we're releasing this week takes it a bit further, sort of some more detailed directions for reform, with a view to kind of consulting on that and having quite a detailed white paper with definitive recommendations by the end of the year. And the exciting thing about this work is it goes beyond what the EEC and Property Council and AR Group and ACOS and others have prosecuted in the past, which has been really around demand-side governance. It's taking in a holistic look at governance overall. Obviously, a lens that is there on demand-side governance, but looking at that in the context of the broader ecosystem, because there's things that ain't working right across the spectrum. So if you're interested in that, there is a chat with Rob in the first fuel feed that will bring you up to speed. And if you enjoy that, you can go read the paper and get in touch to share your views, because we're excited about this a bit of work. And if this is something which floats your boat, we'd be keen to hear from you. And while I'm at it, I should say, which I have neglected to say on this podcast, that as we release this episode, the previous episode in the first fuel feed will be a chat that I had with Energy and Climate Minister Chris Bowen at the EEC National Conference, which possibly there'd be people listening to this podcast that would also be interested in that. I don't know, possibly. It's kind of an interesting articulation of Minister Bowen's views about the priorities that he sees around COP31, but also the broader second-term agenda, the role of the demand side in all of that. I thought it was a good chat. This very podcast, the Let Me Sum Up podcast. Oh, I'm in a hall of mirrors of podcasts. But in the other podcast, this podcast got a shout-out from Minister Bowen, which I think we agreed was your marketing and extortion KPI met for the year, Frankie.
Thank you, Minister, for acknowledging publicly what we've known for some time, which is that you're a listener of the pod. Yes, we love to see it.
All right. That is almost our show for today, but every fortnight we stick around beyond the end of the main episode to record a bonus episode called There Is Too Much, in which we kick back, relax, and cover something that we didn't have time for on the main show. Tennant, not only are we recording a bonus episode this week, but I believe we have a very special guest.
Indeed we do. A super Summerupperer, a friend of the podcast, all-round excellent person, Kylie Turner, freshly returned. And I don't know how, after the rigours of the London to WA flight, she can possibly be fresh. But she is from Bonn and from London Climate Week. She will be favouring us with her first-hand observations of what went down in Old Bonn town.
Indeed. So, to catch up with Kylie's insights and maybe some attempts to share some views based on the reports from the three of us, we'll focus on Kylie's insights, to be clear. Run, don't walk to letmesumup.net and you click on the button at the top of the page, support LMSU. You'll find our Patreon and you can subscribe to access that sweet Boko. Now, that is our show for today. This podcast was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. The paper we covered today was submitted by, I think, Tennant. If you want to be cool like Tennant and send in a paper about CBAMs.
Was it me?
I don't know.
Who can say?
Who could possibly say? It was probably Renard Teed.
What good taste that rascally fellow has.
You can visit our website and click the link for the contact form and send us a paper. And we might read it or we might not. Who can say? But we will certainly consider reading it. That I can promise you. Frankie, is there one thing on our new website that you're excited to point our Summerupperers to?
It would be remiss of me not to mention the delightful range of merch awaiting any Summerupperer who wants to sip from an LMSU mug, who wants to proudly walk around town wearing the LMSU logo on a fancy new T-shirt, or indeed carry your groceries with an LMSU tote bag. We've got you covered. Click on the merch tab and deck yourself out. Be great.
I'm glad to see, Frankie, that you concluded on the most profoundly anti-sufficiency message imaginable.
I did have a thought about that, and I was like,
that's right.
Nah.
Can we have a limited run T-shirt called Sufficiency Now? Brought to you by the Let Me Sum Up podcast.
Oh, I love that as a limited run.
Yes. Limited, exclusive, only 1,000 Sufficiency Now T-shirts will ever be made available.
All right, this means we have to do it now.
Great.
This is the problem, guys. This is the problem right here. So good.
Do it now. For Frankie Musquich and Lieutenant Reed, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Hooray, hooray, hooray. Step on up for Old Doc Tennant's latest, greatest policy panacea. Friends, do you suffer from high emissions at the most embarrassing times? When you look in the mirror, is your iron and steel sector not quite what you'd like it to be? Are you paralyzed by fear of carbon leakage? Then act now. Treat yourself to Old Doc Tennant's patent elixir, CBAM, the cure-all that's for all. That's C for certainty. No more worries about dangerous leakage. B for bounty. The more CBAM takers, the bigger the market where clean is in the green. A for amity. CBAM is friend to all. And M for that CBAM is finger-licking good. So listen to me, your pal and benefactor, Old Doc Tennant, and drop by my emporium to pick up your CBAM today. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to these satisfied customers. Now, I may be just a simple country ammonia salesman, but even I knew I couldn't ask my mama to mix up a barrel of her famous green ammonia when there won't no market that'll pay the premium. That's why I got my mama one of them fine new CBAMs. Thanks, Doc Tennant.
中国担心的是，如果我们在气候问题上采取行动，而美国却无所作为，会怎么样？后来我们意识到，这意味着我们拥有了未来。CBAM 也很棒，谢谢美国。
With developing countries, our European border adjustment was as unpopular as sauerkraut in the lederhosen, despite very long explanations of our Commission on the principle of non-discrimination. Now, thanks to this, carnival barker, old Herr Dr. Tennant, our CBAM is more popular than Wiener Schnitzel in a Wiener dog show. Dankeschön, Herr Doctor. Had enough? Come on down. And who knows? Perhaps CBAM will also cure your gout, dropsy, athlete's head, the staggers, the yips, hysteria, or even wisteria. Find out with CBAM.